Usually, when you look at a military force, there is this underlying expectation of architecture.
Right, yeah, like a structure.
Exactly, a structure.
Yeah.
Look at an army and you see the hierarchy, the chain of command, the tactical doctrines. You see logistics, supply lines, medical corps, communications networks, all that stuff.
Yeah.
You can point at it and say, there it is. That is a machine built for a specific purpose.
It's an organized system. I mean, fundamentally, a military exists to impose order through force, right?
Right.
It operates on rules of engagement, strategic objectives, discipline. Even in the absolute chaos of battlefield, there's a grid underneath it all.
Yeah, it's clean in a sort of conceptual way, even in the context of war. But then you start digging into the history of the 12th Legion, and suddenly that architecture just completely collapses in on itself.
Oh, absolutely. We're looking at a military landscape that is terrifyingly devoid of any of that structure.
It is the absolute definition of chaos actively replacing what used to be order. Like, the systems are deliberately dismantled. I am so glad you are here with us today, listening in, because we are unpacking something truly fascinating and deeply, deeply unsettling.
Yeah, it's a heavy one today.
It really is. We are diving into the horrifying evolution, or honestly, maybe devolution is the better word, of a military force that went from being a proud, disciplined legion into a scattered, apocalyptic plague of fury.
Levolution is definitely the right word for it.
And our primary text for this, the source material we are pulling from today, is excerpts from Red Hunger, The Tragedy and Savagery of the World Eaters.
Which is such a phenomenal text. It really gets into the grit of it.
It does, because this isn't just a military history.
It's really not. I mean, if you look at it purely as military history, you completely miss the actual mechanics of their downfall.
Right, because this is a psychological tragedy at its core. It is a story about madness, about shared pain, and ultimately about addiction.
Yeah, a really horrific kind of addiction.
So get comfortable, because we are going to get into the minds of some of the most terrifying entities in this lore. Okay,
Yep.
let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Because there is this central paradox right at the heart of their entire existence. The big question is, how does an elite, disciplined fighting force become the literal embodiment of mindless apocalyptic rage?
Right. What's the catalyst?
Exactly. What breaks a soldier's soul so completely that they abandon all tactics, all reason, all self-preservation?
Well, to understand that breaking point, you really have to establish the baseline first. You have to look at what they were, but before the rot set in.
Before things went completely sideways.
Right. Before they were known across the galaxy as the World Eaters, they were the 12th Legion. They were forged on Terra, the cradle of humanity, and they were called the Warhounds.
The Warhounds. I mean, even the name has a very specific, aggressive connotation to it.
It does. It implies a predator, but crucially a domestic predator, right?
Yeah.
A hunting animal.
Yeah, something you use.
Exactly. And their early history shows they were created with an incredibly aggressive, hot-blooded nature. They were designed from the ground up for shock assaults and brutal compliance.
But what is truly fascinating here, at least to me, is how the broader power structure, the nascent Imperium, actually utilized that specific psychological profile.
Oh, it's incredibly cynical.
Right. During a period called the Unification Wars, which was essentially this brutal conquest of Earth to unite techno-barbarian warlords under one banner, the Warhounds were held largely in Imperial reserve.
Yeah, they were kept in the back pocket.
They were kept in reserve specifically in case their sheer brutality was needed to quell disloyalty.
And the concept we really need to explore here from the text is institutionalized savagery.
That phrase is just chilling. Institutionalized savagery.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because the Imperium didn't look at this hyper-aggressive legion and think, oh, we need to temper this. We need to train the aggression out of them and make them standard peacekeepers.
Right. They didn't want to fix them.
No, they weaponized that aggression as a tool of ultimate sanction.
It's like keeping a tactical nuke on standby, but instead of radioactive fallout, the devastation is just sheer, unfiltered, kinetic brutality.
That analogy works on multiple levels, actually. Because a nuclear deterrent isn't just about the physical explosion.
Right. It's the threat.
Exactly. It's about the psychological terror of knowing the weapon exists at all. Think about the psychology of a military force whose sole purpose is to be that terrifying last resort.
Yeah, they aren't the diplomats.
No. And they aren't the builders who come in after the war to reconstruct the infrastructure either. Their entire identity, mandated by their creators on Terra, is to be the monsters you unleash when your own people step out of line.
Which implies they were primarily turning this aggression inward, toward the Imperium's own subjects rather than, external alien threats.
Yes.
That has to do something terrible to a soldier's mind.
It creates a deep, deep isolation. I mean, they were the threat of absolute violence made manifest. If a planetary governor rebels, they don't get a standard conventional army sent against them.
No, they get the warhounds.
They get the warhounds. And the historical records in Red Hunger actually describe them as a proud, if savage, legion at this stage.
Really? They were proud of that.
Yeah, they found nobility in their brutal purpose. They sort of saw themselves as taking on the grim, blood-soaked tasks so that the rest of the Imperium could remain clean.
Okay, but wait. If they were already this savage and brutal right out of the gate on Terra, were they just doomed to fall from the very beginning?
That's a great question.
Because, was the noble part of their history just a facade? If you breed an army to be a tool of unfiltered brutality, it feels like you are just setting a timer on a bomb and waiting for it to go off.
Right, and that is actually the crucial debate historians in the lore have about them. Were they inherently flawed, or were they just victims of terrible circumstance?
And what does the source text lean toward?
The evidence in the text strongly leans into the idea that their ultimate fate was a tragic deviation. It implies that their initial state as the Warhounds, while totally savage, was entirely functional.
It was controlled.
Yes. As you said earlier, they were hounds, and hounds have masters.
They were on a leash. They had a handler.
Exactly. They had a rigid command structure. They had a purpose dictated by Terra. The savagery was a tool they wielded, not a master they served.
Okay, I see.
The tragedy is that this delicate balance, being monsters on a leash, was completely shattered.
Yeah.
Because while they were incredibly dangerous as the Warhounds, they were still governed by that imperial authority.
Right.
Everything changed when they were finally handed over to the man meant to hold that leash permanently.
Right. The history shifts drastically from their origins to a single defining catalyst. And this is where the story goes from a grim military history to deeply personal psychological horror.
Oh, absolutely.
The discovery of their Primarch, Angron.
The reunion with Angron is the absolute pivot point for the entire Legion.
Because a Primarch in this setting is essentially the genetic father to the Legion, right?
Yeah, they are these engineered demigods meant to be the absolute pinnacle of human potential. They were designed to lead their respective legions out into the stars to claim the galaxy.
But Angron was not found leading a planetary government or a unified utopian society like some of the others.
No, he was not. He was found broken.
The records in our source describe him as having a tortured soul, and they specifically attribute his torment to these things called the Butcher's Nails.
Yeah.
Just the name alone, the Butcher's Nails, makes you wince.
It's incredibly visceral. The Butcher's Nails are a form of archaeotech, ancient, poorly understood technology.
Right.
And while the text says we don't have a perfect schematic of the exact neural pathways they alter, their function is devastatingly clear. They're cortical implants driven deep into the brain, specifically the limbic system and the cerebral cortex.
Driven deep into the brain. Wow.
Yes, brutal surgery. And they essentially lobotomize the brain's ability to feel joy, peace, satisfaction, or even basic comfort.
They just rip out the capacity for a normal emotional spectrum.
Completely. And they replace it with a constant, unyielding, agonizing torment.
So he is just in pain all the time.
All the time. The only time the pain recedes, the only time the nails offer any relief whatsoever is when the host is experiencing extreme adrenaline.
Oh, no.
Specifically the adrenaline of rage and physical slaughter.
That is horrifying. And this was done to Angron before the Emperor even found him.
Yes, he was a slave, a gladiator on a brutal world, and his slave masters implanted these devices into his brain to make him a better, more vicious killer for the arenas.
Which means the man meant to lead the 12th Legion, this genetic demigod who is supposed to be a paragon of military virtue and strategy, is actually a deeply traumatized, constantly agonizing slave who can only find peace in murder.
Exactly. And this is where the tragedy truly takes root. Because you have to look at the psychology of the Legion at that moment.
Right, they've been waiting for him.
They are genetically predisposed to revere this man. They have been waiting for their father to guide them. And when they finally meet him, he is hostile, he is broken, and he's just screaming in the dark.
And the Legion didn't look at their tortured father and turn away?
No, they didn't.
They didn't say, this man is clearly unfit for command. They leaned in. The historical accounts explicitly state that the Legion was driven to madness by a desperate attempt to share his pain.
It's wild, and this raises such an important question about the nature of loyalty and empathy within a hyper-militarized group.
Yeah.
We often think of military madness coming from PTSD, from the accumulated horrors of war, or perhaps from malicious brainwashing by an enemy state.
Sure, the standard tropes.
But the mechanics of the 12 Legions' descent into absolute madness began as an act of profound empathy.
Okay, wait, how does that even work practically? Their descent into madness started as a twisted act of solidarity.
Basically, yes.
Are you saying they literally broke their own minds just to connect with him?
They absolutely did. They ordered their own medical officers, their apothecaries, to reverse engineer the butcher's nails.
You're kidding!
No. They took the arcane technology that was torturing their father and figured out how to mass produce it.
Oh my god.
And then, legionary by legionary, they willingly strapped themselves to the surgical tables and had these metal cables driven into their own skulls.
I mean, just think about the psychological weight of that for a second. Imagine you're listening right now. Put yourself in those boots. You are an elite soldier. You have conquered worlds. You finally meet your commander, and you find him in agonizing, unceasing pain.
Yeah.
And your response isn't to try and heal him because the text says the tech is too deep, right? It would kill him to remove it.
Exactly. It's inextricably linked to his brainstem.
So your response is, let me carry that with you. Let me feel exactly what you feel so you aren't alone in it.
It is genuinely heartbreaking when you strip away the science fiction trappings. It functions as a terrifying metaphor for generational or passed-down trauma.
Oh, that's a really good point.
Think about how trauma moves through a family or through a tight-knit military unit. The suffering of the patriarch infects the children.
Yeah, it trickles down.
The warhounds desperately wanted a father to admire. What they found was a man who could only communicate through rage and suffering. To bridge that gap, to forge any kind of familial connection with a man who could only understand pain, they chose to embrace his torment.
It's like a cult of shared suffering. If the only language Angron speaks is agony, then the entire Legion decided to become fluent in agony.
That's a perfect way to put it. The phrase from the text, a Primarch's tortured soul, is doing so much heavy lifting in the analysis of their history.
How so?
It signifies that the rot didn't start from a desire for political power. They weren't seduced by promises of wealth or dominion. It started from an infection of trauma.
Right.
Their ultimate damnation was born not from inherent malice, but from a desperate, tragic need for kinship. They just wanted to understand their creator.
And in doing so, they completely unmade themselves, because that shared trauma didn't just change their brain chemistry, it entirely rewrote their identity.
It really did.
The Warhound ceased to exist?
And this brings us to a massive cultural and symbolic pivot in the lore. Angron renames them. They become the World Eaters.
The World Eaters. The name itself comes from Angron's past, right?
Yes, he took it from his former gladiator band on the world where he was enslaved, a group called the Eaters of Cities.
And under his command, the Legion's pre-existing savagery was amplified to horrifying new levels.
Let's dissect the symbolic shift in that naming convention, because the semiotics are immense here. We went from warhounds to world eaters.
Right.
A hound implies direction. It implies hunting a specific prey for a specific purpose at the behest of a master. It is an instrument of the state, serving a function within an ecosystem.
But an eater of worlds, that implies something entirely different. It implies a consuming, uncontrollable force of nature.
Exactly. A hound can be called off. You blow a whistle and the hound returns to heel. How do you call off an entity that exists simply to consume a world?
You can't.
You really can't. The scope of their violence expanded from targeted suppression to absolute apocalyptic annihilation.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Yeah.
It's not just the scale of the violence that changed, it's the entire cultural framework of the army. Taking a name from a gladiator band is such a specific and loaded choice.
It is. What stands out to you about that transition? Moving from a structured Terran military legion into a gladiator band?
To me, adopting a gladiator identity is inherently rebellious. It's a fundamental rejection of military hierarchy.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about what a gladiator is. Gladiators don't fight for strategic statecraft.
No, they don't.
They don't fight to secure borders or establish trade routes or enforce imperial law. They don't care about supply lines or taking strategic high ground.
They don't care about the big picture at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Gladiators fight for survival, and they fight for spectacle. They fight because they are trapped in an arena, and the only way out is through the guy standing in front of them.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
By taking this name and this culture, it feels like they stopped being the emperor's soldiers and officially became Angron's fellow victims. They became brawlers.
They completely abdicated their role as state-sanctioned weapons and adopted the identity of enslaved fighters.
Wow.
And the gladiatorial mindset is entirely selfish in the context of a wider war. It is about the visceral reality of the kill right in front of you.
Right, me versus you.
Exactly. It completely foreshadows their loss of discipline. A general moves armies on a map to achieve a geopolitical goal. A gladiator just swings his weapon until nothing else in the pit is moving.
And the historical accounts explicitly state that under Angron, their pre-existing savagery was amplified to these horrifying new levels.
Yeah.
We already established that their baseline savagery on Terra was enough to be considered a terrifying last resort weapon. Amplifying that means pushing it past the point of any strategic utility.
It becomes savagery for savagery's sake. The violence becomes an end unto itself, rather than a means to an end.
It's just violence all the way down.
Pretty much. The structure of the Legion, the noble if brutal discipline they had as the Warhounds, was eroded by two forces simultaneously.
What were they?
Well, first, the constant thrumming physical pain of the butcher's nails driving them to fury.
Right.
And second, this new brutalist gladiator culture, where strength and bloodshed were the only respected metrics.
So you have this massive army of super soldiers, deeply traumatized, suffering from agonizing brain implants, identifying as rebellious gladiators, and exhibiting an amplified savagery that their own commander is actively encouraging rather than controlling.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a galactic powder keg.
It is the perfect recipe for betrayal. This fundamental shift in loyalty from the distant emperor who created them to the broken father who suffered with them created a massive vulnerability.
The festering trauma they shared became a lever.
Exactly. And as the history of the galaxy shows, darker forces were incredibly eager to pull that lever.
Which catapults us into the Horus Heresy, the massive civil war that tore the Imperium apart.
The big one?
Yeah. The records show that the world leaders were among the very first legions to turn traitor and side with the War Master, Horus.
They were ready for it.
And the underlying reason given in Red Hunger is fascinating. It says their bitterness made them easy prey for Horus's corrupting influence.
Let's focus on that word, bitterness.
Okay.
It is a very human, very poignant emotion for an army of genetically engineered superhuman warriors.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect them to feel bitter.
Right, but what were they bitter about?
Yeah.
If we synthesize everything we've looked at so far, the psychological profile of the Legion at this moment is incredibly clear and incredibly tragic.
They have a staggering amount to be bitter about.
They really do.
Yeah.
They were created to be used as brutal tools, locked away in reserve until the Imperium needed someone to do their dirty work.
Right, kept in the dark until it was time to kill.
Yes, they were denied the glory of the other legions. Then they are handed over to a Primarch who is fundamentally broken, a slave who was stolen from his comrades.
Yeah.
They burden themselves with his torment, the butcher's nails, out of a desperate sense of loyalty and empathy. And what does the Imperium do?
Nothing good.
Does the Emperor cure them? Does he offer them respite?
No, he just keeps pointing them at targets. He uses them as a blunt instrument.
Exactly. They get nothing but more pain. They are gladiators forced to fight in the Emperor's massive arena, which is the galaxy itself.
Man, that's bleak.
They bleed and die and suffer constant neurological agony to build an empire that looks at them with absolute disgust. The other legions look down on them as just butchers.
So what does this all mean? If you look at this through the lens of human nature, think about how this applies to any group, any organization.
Yeah.
When you have a group that feels used, unappreciated, stigmatized by their peers, and forced to carry untreated, unacknowledged trauma, they become incredibly susceptible to radicalization.
The psychology is terrifyingly sound, even in this extreme science fiction setting.
Hmm?
Horus, the War Master, orchestrating this grand betrayal against the Emperor, didn't need to win the world leaders over with complex political treatises.
Right. He didn't need to hand them a manifesto about, like, marginal tax rates or the oppressive nature of the Terran bureaucracy or interstellar trade route taxation.
No, he didn't need to convince them of a grand new vision for the galaxy's governance. He simply looked at this seething, bitter mass of traumatized gladiators and basically said, I know who you can hit.
I know who deserves this raid.
Exactly. He just needed to point their existing simmering rage in a new direction. Toward the masters who put them on the leash in the first place, and toward the brothers who looked down on them.
The corrupting influence mentioned in the histories, it almost sounds like Horus just walked up to the arena doors and unlocked them.
That's a great image.
He didn't give them a strategy. He gave them permission to let the bitterness off the chain. He validated their anger.
And that is the true danger of an army built on institutionalized savagery. If the only thing keeping them loyal is the leash, what happens when they realize the leash is held by someone they deeply resent?
They bite the hand that holds it.
Exactly. The bitterness the records cite is the collective realization that their suffering was for nothing. The Imperium demanded their brutality but never offered them healing, peace, or even respect.
And Horus offered them an outlet for the pain.
Yes.
But here's the tragic irony of their rebellion. You might think this turning traitor would lead to a glorious new empire for them.
Right, you think so.
Like a grand rebellion of the gladiators, a Spartacus moment where they overthrew the emperor and build a society ruled by the strong, where they are finally free.
But pure rage is a terrible foundation for an army, let alone a whole society.
It really is.
It cannot build. Pure violence is inherently destructive. It requires fuel.
And what happens when they run out of fuel?
When it runs out of external enemies to burn, eventually, inevitably, it turns inward. Which brings us to the event known in the text as the final fracture.
Right, the Battle of Scalathrax. This part of the history really emphasizes the sheer tragedy of their trajectory.
It's the nail in the coffin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
After the heresy, after the Civil War ended in this grinding stalemate, the traitor legions retreated to the Eye of Terror, which is this region of space where the laws of physics break down and the warp bleeds into reality.
A literal hellscape.
Exactly. And their ultimate downfall, their fracture into scattered, broken warbands didn't happen fighting the Imperium.
No, it didn't happen fighting the Emperor's loyalists.
It came from a conflict with their fellow traitors, specifically the Emperor's Children Legion. But even more devastatingly, it devolved into fighting themselves.
Yeah.
They destroyed their own brotherhood. It's like a fire that burned so hot it consumes the very house it was trying to heat until all that's left are just scattered burning embers.
That's a powerful analogy.
They retreated into this hellscape of the Eye of Terror, ostensibly alongside their allies, and they just ripped themselves apart.
The profound irony of Scalathrax cannot be overstated, and we have to trace the arc to fully appreciate the horror of it.
Okay, let's trace it.
This is a legion that literally broke its own mind, subjected itself to agonizing neural implants, simply to achieve solidarity with its Primarch and with each other.
Right.
They valued their brotherhood and their connection to their father so much that they willingly embraced madness.
They sacrificed their sanity for unity. They wanted to be brothers in blood and pain.
And yet, the very madness they embraced to stay together is what ultimately tore them apart forever.
How exactly did it happen at Scalathrax?
The environmental pressures of Scalathrax were extreme. It was a freezing world where the temperature would drop to absolute zero during the long night.
Okay.
The World Eaters and the Emperor's Children were fighting a bitter urban war over the few shelters available. But the Butcher's nails don't care about the cold.
Oh, man.
The nails demand blood. When the fighting paused because of the lethal cold, the nails in the World Eaters' heads began to bite. The pain became unbearable.
Because they weren't killing.
Precisely. One of their own officers, Karn, succumbed to the nails' demand.
What did he do?
He took a flamer and started burning down his own legion's shelters.
Wait, his own shelter?
Yes. He forced his brothers out into the freezing night to fight, simply to keep the blood flowing and the pain at bay.
That is insane.
At Scalathrax, they lost the ability to distinguish between friend and foe. The history states they became a scattered collection of warbands. The Legion, as a unified entity, died in the ice and fire of that night.
Because you cannot build a brotherhood on pure violence.
You really can't. Violence at the level they were operating is a universal solvent.
It's a universal solvent.
It dissolves bonds, it dissolves oaths, it dissolves the very concept of an ally.
Yeah.
When your entire existence is predicated on amplified savagery and the physical release of rage, eventually the person standing next to you stops looking like a brother and starts looking like a target.
Because the nails need fuel.
Exactly. The nails don't care whose blood flows, only that it flows.
That is deeply chilling. They didn't fall because the enemy outsmarted them. They didn't fall because they were outgunned or outmaneuvered.
No.
They fell because their internal mechanism for violence completely overrode their internal mechanism for survival and community.
Yeah.
The fire just burned everything until there was no fuel left but each other.
And those scattered embers, as you call them, are what remain in the current era of the lore, the 41st millennium.
Right.
They are no longer defined by Terra or the Emperor, or even really by their Primarch Angron in a day-to-day sense.
What are they defined by now?
They are defined by a singular, horrifying philosophy and a patron deity that perfectly encapsulates their broken nature.
Which brings us to the final and undoubtedly the most disturbing aspect of their evolution, the anatomy of their addiction.
Yes.
The records state they are the ultimate worshippers of Khorne, the blood god. Their battle cry, shouted across 1,000 battlefields, is literally blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne.
It's iconic in the worst way.
And their combat doctrine is, well, it's virtually non-existent by any modern standard.
The tactical analysis of the modern world eaters is staggering in its simplicity. They're the ultimate close combat army.
Right.
They have absolutely no interest in ranged warfare, grand strategy, or complex tactics. Their entire operational approach is summed up in one word.
Charge.
Charge.
Just run at the enemy.
Run at the enemy.
But wait, I have to interrupt this logic because how is that even viable?
What do you mean?
If their only tactic is to just charge blindly, roaring about blood, how are they still a galactic threat?
Right.
I mean, if you have an army of mindless, charging warriors with no ranged weapons, no cover mechanics, and no tactical flanking, shouldn't a disciplined, modern army with artillery, orbital strikes, and long-range laser rifles just wipe them off the map before they even get within 100 yards?
Yeah.
It sounds like mass suicide.
And from a conventional military standpoint, sitting in a war room pushing blocks on a map, you were absolutely right.
It makes no sense.
It is a tactically absurd doctrine. It defies all military logic. But we have to look closely at the language the historians and survivors use to describe them in this final state.
Okay, what do they say?
They don't describe them as an army anymore. They call them the personification of mindless, apocalyptic rage. They call them a plague of fury, a consuming fire.
So it's not just a bunch of guys running at you in a straight line. It's almost like a supernatural force.
It is psychological and physical shock and awe on an incomprehensible scale. They aren't trying to win a tactical victory of attrition. They are a phenomenon.
Wow.
Imagine you are a soldier in a trench. You have your rifle, your artillery support, and suddenly thousands of massive genetically engineered giants armored in blood-red plates erupt from the tree line.
That's terrifying.
And they're moving faster than anything that size should move. They are ignoring catastrophic wounds. Artillery shells are blowing them in half, and the ones still standing just keep running, screaming with a rage so palpable it physically hurts your ears.
The sheer terrifying momentum of that apocalyptic rage just breaks the discipline of those facing them.
Exactly. It's the psychological warfare of absolute, unwavering commitment to violence.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Conventional armies break when faced with an enemy that genuinely does not care if it dies so long as it gets to swing its axe once.
Right.
But the most crucial word in this entire analysis in the text is how the lore categorizes them on a personal psychological level. It calls them addicts.
An army of addicts, forever chasing the fleeting relief of slaughter. That sentence is the skeleton key to understanding them, isn't it?
It is the Rosetta Stone for the world eaters. Their devotion to Khorne, the blood god, isn't a traditional religion.
No.
No, it's not a theology based on faith or spiritual enlightenment or a promise of an afterlife. It is a physiological dependency.
Like a severe substance addiction, but the substance is violence.
Precisely. Remember the butcher's nails, the cortical implants they adopted all those millennia ago?
The ones that cause constant pain.
Yes. The constant tormenting pain they hardwired into their own brains. The lore tells us that their existence, every waking second, is a constant scream of rage.
God,
The only thing that silences that scream, even for a moment, is the neurochemical flood of extreme close-quarters slaughter.
So slaughter provides a fleeting relief. They aren't fighting for territory. They aren't trying to secure resources. They aren't even really fighting for the blood god's political agenda in the warp. They are fighting to get a hit.
They just need a hit.
They are fighting to make the blinding pain in their heads stop for 5 seconds.
That completely recontextualizes their combat doctrine, doesn't it? The total abandonment of ranged warfare isn't just a stylistic choice or a cultural preference for swords over guns.
No.
It is a desperate biological imperative.
Oh, wow. Because shooting someone from a mile away with an artillery shell doesn't trigger the physiological relief they need.
It doesn't trigger the adrenaline spike the nails require to shut off the pain receptors. They need the visceral reality of the kill.
They have to be right there.
They need to feel the blood, to feel the kinetic impact of the axe-breaking bone. They need to close the distance as fast as physically possible to get their fix.
Right.
Standing back and organizing an artillery strike requires patience, planning, and waiting. An addict in severe withdrawal cannot wait.
No, the pain is too great.
The pain is too great. They just charge.
They charge because every single second they aren't engaged in close combat, their own minds are torturing them.
It's horrific.
That is just horrific. They are completely enslaved by their own brain chemistry, which they willingly broke in the first place out of that twisted empathy for Angron. It's a self-inflicted hell.
And that is why they are described as the embodiment of the Imperium's greatest fear.
How so?
Well, the Imperium of Man is an empire built on strict control, on cold, calculated logic, crushing bureaucracy, and rigid hierarchy.
Right, all that architecture we talked about at the beginning.
Exactly. The World Eaters are the antithesis of all of that. They represent the triumph of pure, mindless rage over reason and order.
Yeah.
They are the living proof that all the order, all the military architecture in the galaxy can be undone by a broken soul and a desperate need for relief.
The records in the book describe them as a consuming fire that will not be quenched until the galaxy itself is reduced to a silent charnel tomb.
It's poetry, really.
It is a hell of an image to wrap your head around. A charnel tomb, a place where the dead are just piled up, not a conquered empire, not a new, brutal regime governed by a dark god, just a silent graveyard.
Yeah.
Because an addict's hunger is never actually satisfied, it just consumes until there is literally nothing left to consume.
And once there is nothing left to consume, once every enemy is dead and every brother is slaughtered, the fire finally goes out.
And then the silence.
The silence the history mentions is the only logical conclusion to their existence. They cannot build, they cannot govern, they cannot even stop. They can only eat the world until the world is gone, and then they starve.
So to bring this massive, sprawling narrative together, we have witnessed a truly staggering journey today.
We really have.
We started on Terra, looking at the Warhounds, a brutal but highly controlled weapon, a force of institutionalized savagery kept on an imperial leash.
A leash they willingly unclipped the moment they found a broken father figure who needed them.
Right, leading to that deeply tragic, empathetic adoption of Angron's torment. They mutilated their own brains to share his pain, becoming the eaters of worlds, adopting a gladiator's mindset of pure, visceral survival over military discipline.
Which naturally fostered a deep systemic bitterness.
Yeah.
They realized they were just tools being ground down to nothing, making them incredibly easy prey for Horus, and leading them to turn their amplified savagery against the very empire that built them.
But that violence couldn't be contained or directed for long, leading to their own catastrophic self-destruction in the freezing night of Scalathrax. They fractured the very brotherhood they had sacrificed their sanity to build.
And finally, that leaves them in their current state.
Right. Scattered, mindless addicts of the blood god, charging blindly into artillery fire just to find a fleeting moment of physiological relief from the screaming in their own heads.
Their history establishes them as a dark monument to the fragility of the human soul, even a genetically enhanced, superhuman one.
Absolutely.
They are a stark warning about what happens when trauma is weaponized instead of treated, and when loyalty demands the sacrifice of one's own humanity.
It is a dark, brutal story, but it is incredibly rich in what it says about the nature of loyalty, pain, and violence.
It definitely is.
Which leaves me with a final thought for you listening at home. Something that has been lingering in the back of my mind throughout this entire deep dive, looking at the root cause of all this horror.
What is that?
Well, if the World Eaters' descent into apocalyptic rage, this absolute mindless horror that wants to turn the galaxy into a silent graveyard, if all of that was originally born from a desperate attempt to share their leader's pain so he wouldn't be alone, does that mean the galaxy's most horrifying monsters weren't actually created by hatred, but by a tragically corrupted form of empathy?
Wow. That is a profound paradox to consider.
Right.
The idea that their damnation was paved with good intentions.
It really is. It shifts the entire perspective on what makes a monster, something to mull over as you go about your day. I want to sincerely thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's heavy material, but navigating these complex psychological and historical narratives with you is what makes this so rewarding. Keep asking questions, keep looking beneath the surface, and keep exploring the hidden depths of your own sources. We will see you next time.